Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Well, Ian Kehoe and Tom Lyons are two of Ireland's most high-profile journalists and have recently joined forces to establish a new online news site, The Currency. The Currency plans to deliver insightful, dynamic and brave stories, commentary and investigations. The editor of The Currency, Ian Kehoe, joins me now to discuss this new venture. Ian, many thanks for joining us on this morning's show. Let's start by discussing yourself and Tom's credentials in the journalistic space.
Delighted to be on, Karl, delighted. Yeah, well, I suppose Tom and myself have been working in business journalism for a combined 35 years. For the past, up until we've launched this project, we were the editor and deputy editor of the Sunday Business Post newspaper. I was the editor and Tom had come on board to work with me. So we've been in this space for a very, very long time. And we just really felt that there was an opportunity, a gap in the market to do something different.
So how did you identify the specific niche within business journalism online?
Well, I suppose while we were in the Business Post, you see the data points coming through, and not just confined to there, but across the market. We wanted to have a subscription model. That was core to what we wanted to do. We weren't going to try and build a site around advertising. The digital advertising market in Ireland and in a number of other countries is so tiny you would never make a penny from it. Most of the major publishers and radio and TV and online things are actually forecasting a decline in online advertising revenues over the coming years. Google and Facebook are wiping everybody's face. They're picking up about 96% of the market, so everyone's fighting over very, very little. So that wasn't sustainable. What we wanted to do was then to make it subscription, to try and have recurring revenues, to get people to buy into the project. And we kind of had the view, and we had seen it, that if people are going to pay for something, it's not going to be for a simple news story. It's not going to be for 300 words telling you that Arista's out results or Gelato has bought a hotel. And we had seen that from the data in the Business Post. People will only pay for long-form, in-depth analysis, commentary and investigations, because that's where the intellectual property is. That's where people can actually get some learnings. What we wanted to try and do was to keep our intellectual property within the article so that people would have to pay to look at it.
Now, subscription-based models are difficult to grow and to sustain. What is going to be your approach to acquiring subscribers?
It is a difficult market, but it's a growing market. Ireland in particular is undersubscribed in terms of subscription models. If you look at all the other subscription models, they have a very difficult task because they're competing with themselves. So just say you're the Irish Times. You have a subscription model, so they're asking people to pay for it online. It's a really good product. But you can also go to the hotel and pick up a copy, or go to the shop and pick up a copy of the Irish Times. So you're competing against yourself. The only place you can get our content is in one spot, and it's on the site behind the paywall. There's a number of different areas in terms of trying to attract those, but primarily it's about putting out content we want people to read, and then we'll push that out there through social media, through sharing, through advertising campaigns. We've taken advertising campaigns in the Phoenix, and then there's also, Ireland is a small country. The business community, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. And I think we can communicate with that if we go and talk directly to businesses and try and do corporate sales, explain to them what our story is, explain to them what sort of content we're trying to do. And we hope that the business community will really row in behind us, because I think this sort of product is really needed at the moment.
So on an individual basis, who exactly is The Currency targeted at?
It varies depending on what humour I'm in or depending on what story we put out. But it's people who are not just in business and in finance and economics, but people who are interested in it, people who are curious, people who want to read about, get learnings from people. So, for example, there's one cohort of people will buy a subscription to read an investigation into Sean Quinn and the Quinn family's money trail. Someone else will buy it because they want to read about an interview with Johnny Ronan. Someone else will step on board because they're interested in economics and they want to read what Stephen Kinsella has to say. But I think the one thing that kind of binds and unifies all of those is that they're all curious. They all want to get some sort of learning, some sort of insight, and they don't want to feel left out when they're having that conversation.
So in terms of subscribers, what's the mix going to look like in your business plan from individual subscribers versus corporate subscribers?
Look, we have projections. I don't know if they're going to play out, because projections are exactly that, projections. But certainly from what we've seen so far, there's been a strikingly large number of individuals coming to us looking just to read the content and buying subscriptions, but monthly and annuals. And they're the only two models that we offer, monthly or annual. It's clean and it's crisp. But there's a steady flow now of corporates. The thing about corporates is it's a longer sell. You have to go and talk to them. You have to explain through the product. You have to go through, the robust mechanisms of whatever audit systems that they have. But there's an awful lot of talks in that in progress. The one thing we have in our favour, I think, to be honest, is, when you're in a newspaper, you need to sell 30, 40,000 copies every week in the case of the Business Post to make sure you're financially viable, because you're spending so much money on everything but journalism. What we're trying to do is to flip that around and put the costs into journalism. So we have a much better cost model. Therefore, we don't need as many subscribers to have a viable business.
What is your strategy in relation to growing the subscription base through the corporate market?
We're approaching all of the major professional services firms, all of the major law firms, the accountancy firms. We're engaging and working with an awful lot of these firms around conferences, events and podcasts to try and build up not just that they're subscribers or members, but that they're part of what we do and that we're engaged with them around, talking to their audiences as well. So I think it's really just trying to tell our story of saying, here's who we are, here's our subscriber mix, here's the sort of content that we're doing, and then we hope that they kind of get buy-in.
Now, the currency claims that it will not shy away from stories. In your experience, what stories have media outlets shied away from in the past?
Lots of them, to be honest. I mean, it depends on the title. Different titles have shied away from different stories for different reasons. I was in the High Court earlier this year defending an action that Dennis O'Brien took against the Sunday Business Post when I was editor. There was very few people and very few other titles, and very few radio stations were talking about Dennis O'Brien or reporting on his personal finances. In that sense, I went in the past when we were editing the Sunday Business Post, we did an awful lot of work around Ireland's tax policy. So, for example, we myself and Cliff Taylor, a former colleague of mine, when we first broke the story that Apple had made that Apple had received the €13 billion sweetheart deal with the Irish government, we came under significant pressure from the apparatus of government not to be pursuing that story because it wasn't in Ireland's economic agenda or in the government's economic agenda. But we kept on pushing it because it was the right thing to do. And in the end, the European Commission came down on our side in terms of there was a sweetheart deal. So it's about taking on stories, challenging policymakers, challenging politicians about the decisions that they make, and also challenging business themselves. I mean, we will support business. Of that, there is no doubt, and we'll try and some of the articles we have, we're trying to support young companies like ourselves to get going. But we'll also challenge it. We have done an awful lot of stuff both here and previously in relation to the activities of vulture funds. And again, people say, why are you on about these? They're only utilising the tax code that's there. Why are you down on business? Well, I think that's at the kind of the sharp, grubby end of business. And if we see that, we'll call that out as we see fit.
Now, the Currency's articles are quite extensive and are considerably longer than those you may find in traditional broadsheets or other online offerings. Was this intentional?
Yes, it was. I have seen, one of the big things where there has been a move to internationally has been towards long-form journalism. And people, if they're going to give their time, they're happy to commit a larger portion of the time if they feel they're getting something that's enjoyable or valuable. In the same way someone, if they turn on Netflix, they're happy to give it an hour or 2 hours because they're getting a utility, they're getting a value for it. And it also allows our journalists to express themselves in a longer way, in a bigger way.
A nice feature on the Currency, I have to say, is the audio option, the ability to be able to have the story read out to you.
Big movement towards that. People are now very time poor. If you think about how people consume news and how people consume content, it's really changing. So people might go to some people go to the gym, they download an article and listen to it while they're doing their exercises, or some people might put it on in the car while they're in traffic. And this is an international movement, right? We were with The Economist over in Zurich, who really gave us some of their time to try and outline about subscription models, and were very generous. So in The Economist, they have a suite of voiceover actors over in London and Zurich, literally voicing out all of the articles so that they're all online. And there's now more people online consuming The Economist articles through their ears as opposed to through their eyes. So it's a big thing. No one's been doing it. We're the first people to be doing it here. We're doing it, I think, at the moment on about 75% of our articles. And hopefully the aim will be to push it up the more resources we get.
On the topic of journalism overall, how would you rate the quality of journalistic output in Ireland at present? And is censorship a real-world problem here for journalists?
I'll answer the second part first, I think. It's not censorship. People talk about the defamation laws, and I'm very familiar with them. The big issue is self-censorship, where you're almost afraid to write the story because of the potential kickback in the courts. There is a very litigious culture in this country. The defamation laws are very stringent, and they're potentially enough to shut down an awful lot of newspapers if a case goes the wrong way. But we have a very litigious culture in the same way as we talk about a compo culture. There's a very libelous culture. So people are constantly trying to get money from newspapers and from media outlets. And to a large extent, we don't hear about the vast majority of them. The industry is awash with what I would term secret settlements. So an editor, and I've done this myself, an editor gets a letter, you don't think you've done anything wrong, but it's easier to pay someone a small sum of money to make them go away as opposed to risk the chances of going down to high court and exposing yourself to a multi-million euro legal bill. I think the biggest issue around the quality of journalism, and there's some brilliant journalists, has been the drain from the industry. So as the industry is becoming increasingly under pressure, people have got out, they've moved, they've gone into public relations, they've gone into other jobs, and that's left a dirt. And with the less people are remaining are now required to do more and more and more. So if you go into most of the newsrooms around the country, and I've been in pretty much all of them at some point or other, if you go in there, people are now trying to, a press release comes out, the budget happens, they have to get something up online within minutes, and then they have to do something else, write a feature and write an analysis piece. What's missing is that nobody has the time to sit down and really distill what's actually important. So people are putting stuff up online before they've any chance to determine the import or the impact of what they should be writing about. So people have lost that sort of thinking time. It's a resource issue. Less people are trying to do more and more and more to make up for the fact that the economics of journalism has radically changed and no one's figured it out yet.
And has the problem been then that we're facing quantity versus quality journalism in the Irish market?
Yeah, I think you're kind of hitting the point there. Less journalists have more words to do, and they have to put it out in more platforms. And the other part of it, Karl, is that journalists are not seeing a future in the career, so in the profession. So they're looking at it and saying, will I be here in 5, 10, 15 years' time? And many of them are saying no, so they're deciding to get out. So what we see is a loss of really good people, a loss of great talent, and they get out. And they're seeing opportunities in other sectors.
And Ian, what would you say to anyone that's listening this morning or might have a son or daughter thinking about becoming a journalist? Is it something they should be shying away from or embracing?
Well, I think it's embracing it, and I think if you look at what we're trying to do here, I mean, the easy thing for us would be to go off and do something else, go into the corporate world and double our salaries or something, because no one makes millions from being very little, being in journalism. I think we're at an inflection point, to be honest with you. I think people have slowly cottoned on to the fact that the old traditional models of trying to be everything, of putting out a paper, having a website, trying to do podcasts and all of this at the same time while the advertising market is going down and your readership and your circulation are going down, that model has changed. So I think there's going to be a change towards more niche products, more high-end products, more in-depth products.
So what are your future growth plans for the currency, Ian?
I think the year one, we want to get to our projections. We're starting to do some events and some link-ups with some corporates. There'll be more of that. But what we really want to do is to grow the subscriber numbers, grow the product and the content and the concept, and take stock in about a year's time and see where we are. Hopefully at that point we'll have made some money, we'll be break even. That's what we're factoring in. And then just kind of take it from there. But really the current focus is on A, getting content, and B, then getting subscribers to pay for and read that content.
And what's your approach to sourcing content?
In terms of getting journalists on board, we've been great. I mean, we put out an ad for journalists and we had like 168 applications. We've hired a number of those. The way the dynamic works, you have a core number of staff, salary journalists who are in the office Monday through Friday, and we 5 or 6 of those. And then you augment that with a roster of writers. So you have your columnists like Stephen Kinsella, or your contributors like Rena Maycock or Sam Smith or Konstantin Gurdjieff, and they're all with us. So they kind of feed into the product, and then it's how you manage that going out. In terms of the stories we get, there's an editorial meeting 3 times a week, and we kind of look and say, what stories should we be examining? What people should we be talking to? What are the issues that we want? So, I think the second person that we hired in here was Thomas Hubert. He's a brilliant French journalist, but he was a the news correspondent and digital editor of the Farmers Journal, which might have seemed like a curious place to come into kind of a primarily business and finance publication. But Thomas is a climate change agribusiness expert. And we said that's going to be a massive area. Now, look, it's really taken off to a level that we didn't think it would. But it's about identifying those niches and those sectors where we think we can get subscribers and deliver something where nobody else is delivering.
On the topic of your launch, it worked out much different to what you expected, I think.
It really did. I mean, it was a curious day. Put it in context, we had booked a number of ads across Communicore radio stations. That's the radio group that's owned by Dennis O'Brien. And I was due to go on the Matt Cooper show, actually, to talk about one of the first big stories that we had into the Quinn Group. And shortly before we were due to go on, we were notified that no journalist, contributor or columnist with the currency will be allowed across their platform because they viewed us as a competitor. Now, look, we're not really competing with Spin FM. We're not really competing with Today FM. So I don't really know the logic behind that. We didn't really understand why they were doing it. I thought it was a poor move. I don't think it's the place of commercial teams to decide what sort of journalism is allowed to go on radio stations. But it did have the effect of generating a huge amount of publicity. So for a startup, kind of a plucky startup, which is what we want to be, like we were being talked about in the Dáil after 4 or 5 days, and there's a cross-party motion now to write to Communicore to have the ban. It's not just on ourselves. The Irish Times, you might remember, banned from going on News Talk,
of course,
for a number of years. But it did have the effect of kind of highlighting who we were. We couldn't have bought that level of publicity.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Ian Kehoe, the editor of the new online news site, The Currency. It's a brave move, and I wish both Ian and Tom every success with this exciting venture.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.